Welcome to another episode. So today we have Fabian Bush on, who is a remote viewing project tasker. So welcome to today's episode.
Thank you so much for having me. It's good to be here.
It's an interesting topic, isn't it? Remote viewing. It's something that's sort of come into the ether over the last few years, even though it's been around for a long time. So for those who don't know or aren't aware, what exactly is it?
I, that's a very good question. A lot of people define remote viewing in slightly different ways. So I tried to come up with my own best short definition, which I actually will kind of read to you now. This is what I generally read to my classes. A trainable protocol designed to acquire information about a distant or hidden target without the use of the ordinary senses. And it's important to note also that remote viewing is best done blind. If the remote viewer does not know what the target is, that's ideal because if they do know what the target is, then they can be making up anything, and you really want to be able to test that and make sure that you know where their information is coming from.
So you said to see things rather from a distance without using your normal senses. Let's just think about that first of all. So without sight, without hearing, taste, touch, and all of those sorts of things, but also you're saying blind, and you don't mean blind in terms of visual. You mean blind as in not being told about what they're trying to remote view. Is that what you're essentially saying?
That is absolutely correct.
So,
Yes.
so what are those alternatives then? So, one is that you say, "Oh, imagine this particular area," and you maybe describe it slightly, or you just say, "Imagine an area," and I'm not going to tell you anything about it. What's the situation, and how does that work in a logistical sense?
Good, very good question. What you don't want to do ahead of time is tell a remote viewer, uh, I want you to take a look at this particular site, and then tell them what the site is, because then that's front loading. Essentially, you're saying, what are your opinions? What do you already know about this place? How would you describe it? They can then reach into their own memory, any experiences they've had with this particular place, and they can kind of come up with anything they want. So the way remote viewing is actually done is if you are, like myself, a project tasker, you come up with what you want to see. I always give the example of the Statue of Liberty. It's easy. Everybody knows what that looks like. So what I like to do is say, okay, I have an image and a random series of numbers. This is the target identifier or target address. And I'll have a picture of the Statue of Liberty in an envelope. And I'll have that random set of numbers, that random address written on the outside of the envelope. And I say, all right, I have a hidden target inside of this envelope. It is just an image. I want you to describe it, and then I will give them the target numbers, and that is how remote viewing is done. So they won't know it's the Statue of Liberty or any other target. They'll just know all that they're getting are the blind numbers, and at that point, independently, they can follow the protocol that was established in the 1970s and 80s.
Well, I'm sure we'll come on to that as we go through, but I just want to stick with what you said there in terms of the numbers as opposed to being told the site is the Statue of Liberty, for example.
Mhm.
Do the numbers hold any significance, i.e., latitude, longitude, or are they just random numbers? What's the purpose of the numbers? Is that there to act as a sort of impetus for this conscious awareness of what this thing might be, this connection with that particular area or geography? I think is the thing that I think about when this sort of thing happens, or to try and understand this myself, is like when you think of a friend and then the next second they ring you, like you seem to have this prior connection to something,
Yeah.
and to try and explain it is very, very difficult because it's either
Yes.
saying you can see the future. It's like a precognition or whatever the word would be there, or there is a causal quantum connection of some kind. It's quite difficult to explain, isn't it? Really.
Well, it can be. I find that, well, to answer your questions first, and then to go into how I find the easiest way to explain all of this stuff. I'll say that during the 1970s, when these protocols were first being developed for military purposes, the numbers that were given were latitude and longitude coordinates. So the protocol, one of the protocols I teach is CRV or coordinate remote viewing, and that's where you just get that latitude and longitude. And people don't necessarily have latitude and longitude memorized always. So back then it worked well for, oh, well, I don't know what's on the map without looking at one and actually looking at the lines. So just give me the numbers and I will perceive what's there. That's how it was originally done. And then it was discovered that it doesn't matter. You don't need coordinates. You can just use any random set of numbers. And the way that set of numbers works is they are not specific to a target. So they're no longer coordinates. They are now just the numbers on the outside of an envelope. Or the way I like to explain these things is usually by talking about them in computer terms, because a lot of our current computer technology has some kind of organization that's based on human consciousness. So these coordinate numbers or these random numbers essentially can be like saying, all right, this is a random set of numbers created by a random number generator, but they're the numbers on the outside of this folder on your desktop. So you go to your computer. If you want to find out what the target is, click on the numbers target 0001. And then you go to that folder on your computer, you open it up, and there goes the image. So it's kind of that same way in remote viewing, where the numbers can really be anything. If you're on, say, a target number 237, then you'll know to go to that particular folder in your computer. And so that's basically how the numbers operate. They don't say anything about the target itself. They're purely a way of getting to the answer and connecting to that target uh, in an organizational structure.
So what you're saying is that you have to have attributed the number to something first of
Hmm.
all, because otherwise you could just have an envelope with no numbers because it doesn't have a bearing on anything, if that makes sense. So you're saying that you have to have,
Correct.
in when it's in your computer, you've got all these folders, and there's actually something there in terms of an image that when you write the number without knowing what's in the folder, using and you'll probably explain this better than me, so I'll let you do it in terms of
Oh
meditation
no.
and getting
What you just said, yeah, you just put it beautifully. Uh, there can be thousands of remote viewing targets on your computer that you're practicing with. There are a lot of practice target websites where you can just go on a website and it'll have a few hundred images, but you can't see any of the images. They're all behind a little folder with a number next to it. And so you described it beautifully. It is a number that is associated with a hidden target. And it's just a way of identifying what that target will be. So, random numbers or numbers in a chronological order. I tend to write when I give a target, it's usually that day's date. I do that just for my own way of keeping things in order. Other people will just say target number 0001, target number 0005. And so everybody does it a little differently. All that matters is that you be able to identify the folder that it's in, but also know that the numbers have nothing to do with giving you clues about what the target actually is.
So what's the sort of percentage? If let's say that you become quite good, it's not with anything. If you drive for the first time, you have to think about the clutch and the handbrake and where the wing mirrors are and all these sorts of things. But as you do it more often, you can and you've probably had this as well. If you drive, you can drive for 5-10 minutes, and then you just sort of wake up and you're like, well, how did I get here? I can't remember the last 10 minutes. I was in a sort of daydream, and I was on sort of autopilot. What can be that percentage gain from someone who's just starting off to someone who is an elite, like Ingo Swann, for example, that gets to a high percentage of getting these things right? How does one go about doing that?
Practice. It's purely practice. Ingo himself, when he first started, there's a lot of beginner's luck, a lot of people who have natural abilities to perceive things. They will have a high percentage right off the bat, and that's good. But remote viewing protocols were not necessarily designed for people with high psychic abilities, because when it was being developed, it needed to be something that could be trained to non-psychic people that were in the army or other places in the military. So it all comes down to practice. Just the more practice you get at remote viewing and following these protocols, which is a very strict kind of way of doing it, the better and more accuracy you reach. Now, I'll have to add to that that for me personally, when I've done my remote viewing, and I haven't done personally a whole lot of remote viewing myself, but one of the first lessons I learned is that a lot of that practice that you're getting is not so much about learning how to perceive the target better. It's about learning how to connect with your own subconscious better. And it's your subconscious that is actually doing a lot of the work. So while you're remote viewing, you are essentially trying to shut down your thinking mind. And because you're not trying to think about what the target's going to be, you're trying to shut everything down, trying to relax and think about as little as humanly possible. And then it's your subconscious that you're asking the questions. And it's your subconscious that is aware of these remote perspectives that you may have access to.
So is that because of sort of analytic overlay, as it's called? If you're thinking your way through it rather than
Yes.
feeling, then you're sort of contaminating your own thoughts or your own feelings through thought, essentially.
100%. Now, you said the words right there, analytic overlay. That's what remote viewers call an AOL. And when you are writing down your impressions of what the target is, there's a specific place to write down your analytical overlays, and that's perfectly okay. Ideally, you don't want to have a whole bunch of thoughts coming in and analytical moments, but if they do come in, you just write them down and then you try to clear them out of your mind. Let them go. You've written it down already. Now let it go and get back to writing down the basic impressions that are coming into you. And ideally, you will be able to move on. There's always the chance that something you write down as an AOL will be correct, but it might also mislead you because that is your thinking mind.
You mentioned protocols. I just want to come back to that for a second. You've mentioned
Mhm.
protocols probably a couple of times in the conversation thus far.
Yes.
What are the protocols? What is the step by step? Because we've talked a little bit about what it is and what the sort of outcome is, but I want to look at maybe the process of actually how you get there.
Okay. There are multiple protocols. There, um, when I talk about protocol, I guess the primary one that I would start most people with would be the controlled remote viewing, CRV. And because it wasn't the first protocol developed, but it was certainly one of the safer ones because I'll get into safety of these things later. But when I talk about the protocol, the purpose of this protocol is to make sure that you are distracting. It serves several purposes. It distracts your thinking brain from interrupting your remote viewing session. And then two, since you're ideally not thinking about what the next step is, it's just a piece of paper that'll say what the next step will be. It will start with, okay, what textures are coming to you? And then you can just sit back and then think about what textures are entering, are being yelled at you from your subconscious. You just write those down. And then when you feel like you've gotten enough textures, it'll say, okay, the next line will say, what colors do you think are prevalent at this site or on this target? You write down your colors, and then moving right along, what smells would you perceive if you were physically at the site? So earlier, when I talked about uh, not using your physical senses, that's part of it. You're not using the physical senses you have in the room, in the space where you are right now. You are exporting your physical senses to a target location, uh, where you can perceive something else. So if you were in this place, what would you be smelling, seeing, touching? What would your five senses be perceiving there? And then, of course, it also asks the protocols will have spaces for you to say, what emotional impact does this have on you if you were in this place? And what is the aesthetic appeal of this place? What are you sensing? So it's basically a list of things to probe for, to probe your subconscious for.
So essentially, you're saying that you're looking at sort of features of a situation, and to be honest, it sounds very much like a visualization. You know, athletes talk about the fact that they could smell the mats or the ring. They have experienced the room, and actually, when they go into the room, it feels very much like it did when they visualized it. You know, they hear the crowd and all these sorts of things. So it does sound very much like that. And to all of those sort of skeptics out there, for want of a better phrase, the pure science guys, and you know the
Mhm.
guys that are materialistic. Are there any people or pieces of evidence where this has happened in the past? You mentioned earlier the military. I understand it's been used with the CIA before. Have you got any good examples that people can sort of look into to show you that actually maybe this is more scientific than maybe it may seem at first?
That is a wonderful question. And it is a question that has been coming up for decades. And before I answer it with examples, I'll say that this program started in the early 1970s. The CIA, NASA, the US government, and the Russian government, and several other governments, but primarily the US and the Russian governments, the Soviet Union at the time, they poured millions of dollars into these programs. And on the American side, the the various programs, continued on for more than 20 years. And so to start, I'll say these programs never would have lasted anywhere near as long, and nowhere near as much money would have been poured into them if there wasn't something scientifically measurable here. So that's one of the big things to start skeptics with. Let them know that a massive amount of research, and this was black budget uh, tax dollars that were poured into this. So they definitely found that there was reason to be pouring this level of money into it.
Just,
So
just,
that's the
just, just, just
yeah
on that, actually, just quickly before you
yeah.
carry on, and for me, another way to sort of put that is when have the government, especially the US government, etc., ever done something where it isn't in either some financial benefit or some long term benefit or an experimentation to gain a benefit at a later stage? I
Mhm.
can't remember many, or whether it was control or anything. So
Yeah.
there's a lot.
Oh yeah, the government doesn't just okay, the governments do flush money down the toilet, but not for 20 plus straight years. It's they definitely uh well, the reason both governments got so heavily into it is, well, there's a whole historical backside. So I'll say the reason America got into it is because valuable top secret information was leaking to the Russian government. And the only explanation we had at that time was that there must have been, we knew that they didn't have spies in particular places. We knew that for a fact. And yet some of this classified information was still leaking. So they thought it could only be some kind of a psychic program. And sure enough, when American spies were in the Soviet Union, they did learn that the Soviet Union was putting a great deal of research into psychic programs where they were actively spying on the US. So it was a bit of a back and forth. There was a bit of a psychic arms race in a way, and it kept going. In fact, it went all the way until 1995, and that's when the American side of the program was officially declassified and shared. And there are probably still programs going on today, but that doesn't answer your full question. You wanted to know about the things that can be found publicly. So the CIA website, I think that's the CIA archives. Off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you. I probably have on my computer where I can tell you the specific website, but the CIA archives are available to anyone on the internet, so you can look that up, and you can find many examples of um, remote viewing targets from the 70s, 80s, and 90s that have been declassified and put right there for everyone to see. These are also held in a number of universities, Duke University, University of West Georgia. So there are a lot of examples of remote viewing from the most famous remote viewers from around the world, all available. And these are things that were done under blind protocols.
Yeah, because I even obviously before the sort of conversation, and I tend to do this generally anyway because I'm interested in quite a few things. I obviously listen to other shows, podcasts, and research about this, and one of the things I came across, and you'll probably be more versed in this than me, was that Ingo Swann successfully managed to remote view Jupiter and see that there was rings on Jupiter prior to scientists being aware of it,
Right.
which is kind of crazy to think about.
It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. And I've looked into that quite a bit. In fact, that is the introduction to the documentary I'm currently working on about Ingo Swann and his life and his work. So I go through all of his history within this documentary, and I chose to start with the remote viewing of Jupiter because you're right. He projected his consciousness to Jupiter. The goal was for him to project his consciousness there before Pioneer, the Pioneer probe, and before the Voyager missions. And it was the later Voyager missions that validated what Ingo claimed to see on Jupiter. And so it was an amazing experiment. But one last point I should make to your previous question about this for the skeptics. I also came into this from a scientific background and a skeptical background. I think it's very important for people to be as skeptical as possible in these things. And I suggest anybody who does not trust the government and what the government has declassified, I say go and give a remote viewing task yourself. If you want to test these things for yourself, there is absolutely nothing stopping you. Just if you know people that are interested in this topic, even if they don't have any remote viewing background, You can test this with almost anyone because people off the street during the 1970s, people were coming in off the streets for experiments where they get paid a little bit of money to do a little mental test. They were coming in, and so many of the people that were coming in had some level of remote viewing skill when given the protocols. So these are things that you could test yourself for free with your friends, and any doubt you have, you can satisfy it within a few weeks. Just get a group of people, come up with a blind target. The protocols are online, where you can learn a lot about this stuff yourself, and then go at it. That's what I did. That's how I got in. I basically created a Facebook group called the Future Applications of Remote Viewing, and I invited people to come and remote view blind targets that I had created. And after they would give me their impressions, they would email me their impressions of the target, and and then I would then reveal what the target actually was, and then we would all have a conversation online, and these would be recorded. So that's how I did it. That's how these protocols were proven to me. And you can reinvent that wheel as many times as you like. Everybody's free to go out and do this.
I think that's the thing, though, isn't it? With science, a lot of people are very naive to the fact that everything in science is 100% correct, when actually science now is disproving things from 5 years ago. So, or 50 years ago, or 100 years ago, or 200 years ago. So the very thing that we've thought for 200 years is now wrong. But yet we are still very arrogant to think that the new thing that we now believe is now 100% cemented and it's 100% correct, with no possibility that actually that could also be incorrect.
Yeah.
In the future, going back 1,000 years, the fact that if someone said, "Look, you could have AI, for example, or you can speak to your friend across the world, or you could have an aeroplane or a car," they would think that was stupid. And maybe there are things that may seem
Yeah.
crazy at this point, but actually in the future they are going to be, possible. Just coming back to what you said, do you think that potentially remote viewing is just another form of intuition?
It can be. There are a few things you said that, yes, our current understanding, I do not like the word belief because people will defend beliefs regardless of whether they're later proven right or wrong. So I personally I'm not much interested in uh, holding personal beliefs. I have to be ready to let things go. As soon as there's better information, excuse me, as soon as there's better information available, I've got to let go what I previously thought. And so science, in my experience, there are a lot of scientists who have come to believe in certain things as the right answer. This is proven, and we're going to stick with this forever. And so many of those things are being disproven now, and so many theories are falling apart that a certain level of faith in science is starting to drop away. And unfortunately, people think that science is something you should have faith in, when really science should only be about asking questions and then seeking answers with the very best tools we have at that time. The moment tools get better, you need to be ready to reevaluate things because we are starting to uncover things right now that negate hundreds of years of what we thought were science.
Hundred
So I'll
percent,
say that.
100%. And there's the whole, you mentioned taking on new information and changing your opinion. That's what's called Bayesian thinking, where new information, okay, that changed my opinion, I will change my opinion. Most
Hmm.
people instead have confirmation bias where, oh, that's bullshit, that study. And
Yeah.
science is very much uh, part of that, or aligned with that cognitive bias. I'm actually writing a philosophy trilogy basically, and one of the things that is in there is about science, for example, and how, yeah, is it? And one of the questions is basically, is science just ideology? Is it political? Because evidently, over the past, it has been. Much
Yes.
like, you talked about the fact that remote viewing, they funded it for 20 years. Maybe they're still funding it. Maybe like MK Ultra, that's apparently gone. Is it really? Have they just re-guised it into another form? And DARPA and these sorts of things, just because you're not aware of it, and the funding could be loosely, moved through different ranks. Much like the placement, layering, integration of money laundering. The same thing can happen with governments where they, pile money into things that you're not aware of. So there's a lot of that,
Yes.
epistemological, or the epistemological side of things, of course. But yeah, there's a lot to it on that basis.
Hmm. Yes. Now I think it's important that everyone know that how science can become corrupted sometimes. And I've seen where science can be corrupted by a corporation, for example, that wants to push a certain idea of perhaps the new healthy drink or some kind of a medication or something like that.
Vaccination, even possibly.
Exactly. So science can be manipulated by people that are not scientists very easily. And that's unfortunate, but it happens. But underneath all of that corruption, I like to think that there is still uncorrupt science where true research is being done, and that is an ever-evolving pool of knowledge. And the public does not always have access to that. Sometimes what is being uncovered in real science is covered up by something that is popular or unpopular, or especially in times of war, where, say, a new technology is being developed. So, science, when online in social media these days, it's a very popular thing to say, scientist has found, or science says. I'm like, well, what scientist specifically said that? What university specifically said that? And I would like to see the tests that were done, the experiments to make sure that they were done under proper protocols. There are a lot of things in place that are actually good scientific fundamentals, and and the world has lost a lot of that recently. So yeah, I think it's important to question everything, absolutely everything.
It's definitely something that, and again, something I'm talking about. And so I'm writing the first of the three. This one's more sort of like these sort of logical, epistemological things, and then the later books are, moving into, religion and God and all those metaphysical things. But one of the things as well that you just said is about language. If
Mhm.
people say, "Oh, well, science, follow the science," science says it, like it's some sort of that ends all debate. Like you said, you're not even going to dive in further. We saw this with COVID. Apparently, the science said X, and now actually we're seeing that it was manipulated. Look at what happened with Fauci, and the numbers were cooked basically. So it
Yes.
has to be a level of pragmatism with everything.
Yeah.
Um,
And there are so
Definitely.
many scientists who disagree with each other. These are
Of course.
highly intelligent scientists, and they go at each other, and even they cannot agree with themselves. But that discourse is important. It's okay that scientists disagree with one another. That's important. It's when one scientist rises to the top and then all the others are silenced. That is what I watch out for. And one example of that is Albert Einstein. When people think Einstein, they think the greatest scientist of all time. He is the epitome of scientists. But guess there are hundreds of scientists that were silenced right around the same time as Einstein was signing off on things like nuclear science that would have led into the atom bomb. So there's a rabbit hole you can go down with how Einstein, now I love Einstein, I'm not speaking against him, but I will say there are scientists who said things that were contrary to some of the things Einstein said. And those are scientists who their findings are now starting to become a little more mainstream, in that they, a lot of scientific studies, particularly where astrophysics is concerned, a lot of those silenced scientists we're now starting to revisit some of what they said. This is getting off the topic of remote viewing,
But
but
it,
it's important.
it leads into it actually because as you said, theories. A lot of theories of fact or facts of theories, if that makes sense. The theory of X now becomes fact until it's disproved. It's a case of something as true until it's disproved, basically, which is how
Mhm.
science basically works, of course.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but talking about science, what's your understanding of the science of remote viewing itself? I.e., how do you think it works? Because fundamentally, even if we are kind of taking a dig at science in some respects, science has its amazing things as well. And actually, we're going to try and use scientific terms to maybe try and explain what remote viewing actually is. So, what's your
Yes.
sort of thoughts about how it works, how we can view things from a distance? Is it quantum physics? Is it just intuition? Is it that we are this one big consciousness and actually we can tap into it? What do you think it is exactly?
Your third guess was the closest to what I would agree with currently.
One
The
big consciousness,
idea,
basically.
the idea that we are one big consciousness. That's the closest we have some happy evidence for. This was evidence that has been gained scientifically over the past couple decades, but that is evidence of things that have been said for thousands of years, by various groups of people who engaged in magical practices. So before I get into some of that old stuff, that'll have some people tune out as soon as I say the word magic. So to take it right back to the scientific studies that have been done recently, we well, first, I give a presentation that is in excess of about half an hour on the nature of mass consciousness on a scientific level. So it's a lot to cover right now very quickly. And some of these talks are available online, so I can give you links to these things. But in short, I guess I will say that the question came up. Remote viewing seems to operate. It seems to work. It was giving valuable intelligence during the 70s, the 1970s and 80s. So the question came up, how is it working? In what way, how is this working? If our consciousness is limited to the brain, how could we possibly have a way of getting this to operate? How can we extend our senses out there and actually return with usable information? And here is where I'll talk about my favorite scientist who was involved in these studies, and that was Dr. Michael Persinger, who is now passed, but his research is available online in the form of many books. Some people may have heard this name already, but essentially, he's a neuroscientist. So he came into this saying, well, everything that is in human experience has a neurological correlate. So anytime you touch something, anytime you see something, anytime you think something, or experience anything, there is a neurological connection with what you are experiencing at that time. So we'll start there. That is something that any scientist should be able to agree with and understand. If you experience something, there is something measurable in your brain that you can use to say, if say you had electrodes on right now, A neuroscientist can sit right next to you, read your EEG, and say, "Oh, you are thinking about likely this," or "You are experiencing happiness. Oh, you seem to be very relaxed right now." These are all things that can be neurologically measured very easily. That is a basic science that we currently have. So in the case of Dr. Persinger, he worked with Ingo Swann under EEG and electrodes. He had everything hooked up, and he actually took Ingo Swann's readings while he was remote viewing. So Ingo was given remote viewing targets that he was blind to. He had no idea what he was looking at. He was just given the numbers. He would sit, he would remote view, and he would give over his results. They talk about their feedback. But what was most interesting is what his brain was doing while he was remote viewing. His brain waves actually changed. They raised up into a higher brain frequency of about just over 7 hertz. And what's interesting is that Dr. Persinger noticed that this 7 hertz matched the same 7 hertz of the general Earth frequency, the Earth's electromagnetic frequency, which we currently call the Schumann resonance. And so he found that on an average day, when the Schumann resonance, he didn't call it Schumann resonance, he generally just referred to it as the Earth's electromagnetic frequency. When Earth atmospheric conditions were calm and normal, Ingo's remote viewing was highly accurate when he would match his frequency to that of the Earth's. And whenever the Earth's magnetic frequency was distorted, say by a wild rogue sunburst, some kind of an eruption from the sun, something that would throw off. You've seen the images of how the Earth's magnetic field can be distorted. When the Earth's magnetic frequency was distorted, Ingo's remote viewing uh, accuracy was also distorted. So Dr. Persinger discovered a correlation between Ingo's ability to remote view and the Earth's field at the same time. So it appears that Ingo was tapping into a greater field that was contained within the Earth's atmosphere. And so that is the first, what we would currently say is the scientific approach of what it seems he's doing. He is somehow synchronizing with a greater field. And then we can take it further and say that that field seems to contain information that human consciousness and the consciousness of other beings can tap into and draw information directly from. So is that making sense so far?
Yeah, of course. And I think this is, again, coming back to the science thing, isn't it, really? Because although science has done a good thing in terms of, yep, we've got the stats out, we can see the brain chemistry, we can see the brain waves, and clearly we can see that there is something that's happening, and we can see on this piece of paper, yeah, there's results here, and again, science shows the results, but what it doesn't show, and this is the more interesting part, and this is why, for anyone listening who thinks science knows everything and we should only listen to science, it's even in this example, it's only showing the results and is reverse engineering a causality of that situation. The big question is, where is that information coming from that's causing
Yeah.
those brain? That is the big question, and ultimately,
Mhm.
science will probably never ever prove this because there's certain things that are limited by our instruments, our language, our way of thinking. You know, if you have a child who's 2 years old, you can tell them about quantum physics. They are not going to understand it. It's out of their wheelhouse. They are not developed enough, and in some senses, maybe we're not developed enough in order to really understand how this works. All that we can say is it does work, and we can kind of prove it through the results, but we will never understand how it actually works out there in real time?
Well, I'll add a bit to what you said here. And the first thing I'll say is to the audience member. You said science knows everything. To the audience member that I know you're referring to audience members that may think that way. I would say that anyone that thinks that science knows everything, that would be setting them up for potential failure or lack of understanding. The truth is, and this is what I love about science, is that science knows nothing. It is better to know nothing than to claim to know everything and be wrong. So, what science gives us is a wonderful approach to say, currently, with our tools, we can test this and we see this result and it's repeatable. So, that's what I love about science is that it says currently, based on what we have, this is the best we can say. And I cherish science for that reason. Science knows nothing. Their humans will take what is given to them scientifically, based on the scientific data that comes in. They'll take that and they'll say we know certain things. But as soon as better information comes in, we can either confirm what we thought we knew, or we might have to throw a lot of things away. So that's that approach on science. And what I'm liking about what science is currently showing us about how remote viewing might work is that it's giving us something new. Now, a great thing about science is that we can use it to build machines, tools. We would not have television, cars, cell phones. We wouldn't have any of these things if certain aspects of science were not correct. So what I love about uh, what we're gaining scientifically about human consciousness and remote viewing is that technologies can improve based on what we think we know about remote viewing. And that's what is exciting to me. So, one example would be where Dr. Persinger ran his experiments about how Ingo was able to not necessarily meditate, but he was able to slip into a mental state that made it so that he could change his brain wave frequencies to match the Earth. So, what Persinger developed as a result of that was a helmet that you could wear that would artificially cause the human brain to match the frequencies of the Earth. And so, what an amazing thing. When you have a new technology that can utilize something in the environment. We may not know all the facts about how remote viewing works, but when Dr. Persinger designed this helmet, he put it on people with no remote viewing skill or background. And when they were given the protocols, their abilities to remote view increased dramatically. He essentially packaged what Ingo Swann was able to do, and then he was able to repeat it in other people. So, what an amazing thing you can do with science when you are uncovering little pieces of the truth. So, yes, we are gaining some understanding and we can utilize some of that, which is great. And also, when you are remote viewing technologies that you might not understand, and I've had my own team of remote viewers do this, we would research technologies that were uh, let's say, alien to our current way of thinking? And how could new technologies improve on what we currently use, be it in jet propulsion, propulsions in general, other technologies in medicine and pharmaceutical industry? Those things can be remote viewed as well. So it's a weird and dramatically different from our usual scientific approach, but it is yet another tool that can be used and verified later.
100%. And we've talked a little bit about the brain over the past X number of minutes. And again, coming back to the book, because it's something I'm very interested in. overlaying this with logic as well, is there does seem to be a correlation between consciousness and the brain. Because if you were to slice half your brain off, your conscious ability would reduce. We've seen it in excuse me, people have been injured and things like that. They've had a car crash and suddenly they are less conscious than they were before. So there clearly is a correlation, but it doesn't. For me, it doesn't mean causation. There's something called a causation correlation fallacy, which means that we seem to think that our brain causes consciousness, when actually there could just be a correlation between the brain and consciousness, and actually there is more to it. We just don't understand it yet, if that makes sense. There's more out there.
That's
There's
very good.
more to understand than just, oh, the brain causes consciousness. Does it actually cause consciousness, or does it receive consciousness? And the fact that it's damaged means that it's unable to receive certain parts of the wider universal consciousness that would otherwise be the information that you could receive, which is why there is sometimes a link between intelligence and awareness, because
Mhm.
your cognitive functions are heightened, and the same reasons that drugs such as psychedelics increase some people's ability and these sorts of things.
You've said
It's
a lot that I could take apart. That there, you've made so many statements now that are amazing and all a part of my personal research. Um, so many important things just then. You went into psychedelics, which is huge. You went into the there's the assumption many scientists have said that consciousness is caused by the brain. I would disagree with that statement now. Based
same.
on the information that the CIA has declassified and a great deal of research that has gone into things that are testable, repeatable, remote viewing only being one part of this. I would say, in I'll use my own words now to say that we seem to not cause the consciousness. Consciousness seems to be almost everywhere. I personally believe, because I've not been disproven on this, but there seems to be a lot of evidence that we exist within a field of consciousness, a large field of consciousness that seems to condense uh, amongst each of us individually, but we're still swimming in this field of information that also has conscious characteristics to it. So I think as far as we need to define consciousness and we need to define what it is to be a human being and what it is that the brain does. I personally would say that the brain um, seems to be more like a computer. Uh, you can damage your computer if I'd say that if the brain is your computer, then consciousness would be more like the internet, a field that exists outside of the computer that the computer has access to, but the field that exists regardless of whether or not your computer falls out of a window or you lose your cool and you throw it against the wall. The brain seems to serve as the first of all, there's memory. You can store your own personal experiences in your brain. So that's a part of a computer. And then your brain computes things, how, in our case, how to survive and how to interact with our environment on a moment-to-moment basis. These are the things that the brain does. And the brain is also trained in many ways based on your previous experiences that are now stored in your own hard drive. Um, Now, the brain can be backed up to the internet. The computer can be backed up to the internet in, I believe, much the same way the brain can be backed up into this greater field of consciousness that is within the field of the Earth. And then, of course, the Earth is also within the field of the solar system. And there are greater and greater You look at this in a fractal way, and everything exists within a field that is greater than itself. So earlier, when we were talking about um, scientifically, uh, remote viewers connecting with the Earth and the Earth's frequency fields, um, that is the new scientific way of saying a very old, thousands of years old concept, which say back in now we live in the Western world. Eastern world people have often referred to this as an Akashic record. That is just a sky record of information that is all around us all the time. We seem to now be uncovering scientific evidence for what would have been described as an Akashic record. That's something to freak out the scientific end of your listening community. But it is interesting how science seems to be uncovering things that very ancient people have always had a semi-understanding of. They just said things differently.
There's again, like you said, there's loads to unpack. From what I said, there's just as much to unpack there. Whether it's looking at from a philosophical perspective, in terms of consciousness, is it that the brain creates consciousness or that consciousness creates the brain? Or in terms of consciousness creates everything or everything creates consciousness, it's unclear. Or whether it's the monads, which I can't remember the philosopher's name now. It will come to me in a second. Spinoza, I think, that said actually every little particle is conscious, much like the particle splits experiment, and we're just made up all of those particles. Okay, maybe it's that. Or you said about uploading consciousness. I think they did that with the fruit fly, didn't they, recently? They
Yes, they
copied a
did.
fruit fly, and the fruit fly must, maybe that's conscious in that simulation. And then that leads to further questions about whether we're living in a simulation. The whole Nick Bostrom and Rizwan that talk about that, and actually, does that point to a creator? And so it's going down the rabbit hole, turtles all the way down, sort of thing.
Yes. And you've mentioned the simulation. One thing I've discovered that leads to confusion. There are certain words that humans are so used to using. Everything we do is from a human perspective. And so when we say certain words like simulation or like God, because the two are similar, they're related. If you talk about a simulation of eventually you're going to bring up the concept of some sort of a conscious deity.
Yeah.
And what's What's interesting in that, one thing that I'm learning personally to do is to expand outside of the words we use that we have sometimes dangerous preconceived notions of. So when we say simulation, the danger of that word is that a lot of people will think of things like The Matrix, the movie The Matrix. They'll think of something that was artificially created and then we were put into it. So if you step outside of the human concept of that, you and then realize that the reason we have the word simulation is because we have created simulations. What if our understanding is we're making things in the image of something much bigger that came before our words. So when we say simulation, we might think of something negative, like the Matrix, and I'm hoping I'm making sense here, when really the nature of reality, we would call it a simulation, but that word might be a misnomer because we have these notions about what a simulation is. It's kind of like the comparison I made of consciousness being the internet and the computer being our brain. I wouldn't want people to think that some God created a computer and an internet and it's kind of going in that direction. This is where it gets really difficult to try and put into words because what we're uncovering about the nature of reality, perhaps the universe itself, we're recreating little pieces and we're thinking that what we're creating is expandable to the universe when it's actually the reverse.
Yeah.
We're starting to gain small understandings of reality. But what we're finding, we don't want to say, oh, we've just discovered this. It's expandable to the universe. That is the human perspective trying to look out to the universe when what I'm trying to learn to do myself is what is a universe perspective looking back at us? That's very difficult to do, to step out of what it means to be human, but it can be done. And that's where out-of-body experiences really come in handy and taking and attempting to see things from a non-human perspective.
I think one of the key points of that is, and we'll come on to the second part, is words are loaded. Like, if we're going to argue about, does God exist? And this is why I don't have this argument with people, because we need to specify, are you talking about the Abrahamic kind of version of God? Or are you talking about a creator in general? Are you,
Mhm.
what are we talking about? What attributes are you already attributing to God? Do you see them as a man in the sky? Do you see them as part of everything, like panentheism, sitting separate to the universe as a creator? So I think what you're basically saying is what's called panendeism or panentheism, basically, depending on if you believe that there is uh, basically control of that deity or not. Is that instead of God sitting above, if you imagine like a spotlight, that's God, and everything else sits underneath the stage, if you will. What panendeism and panentheism says is God and the universe are the same thing. And the way that I sort of consider this is Alan Watts, if you're familiar with his work,
Mhm.
said it beautifully.
I'm
He
a big
said,
fan of his.
yeah, so he said something like, so think of flowers and bees. The bees need the flowers and the flowers need the bees. So are they the same thing? Because they must have mutually come into existence. So bees are flowers, basically, because if they need each other and without each other they die, could you say they are the same thing? And then you extrapolate that across the board and everything is the same thing, if that makes sense. So,
Yes. What you just said is so key. It is so important to make those kinds of distinctions because uh, w- another way of approaching that is how much of the separateness that we define is an illusion. There are so many illusions. The idea that there is a big difference between you and me, in this case, because of a distance between us. You're in a different country. And here we are having this conversation and thinking on the same wavelength. So distance, um, and then you can get into the way we classify people. We try to put up walls between each other politically, sexually, racially, age-wise. There are so many things. There are so many walls we set up to try and classify things. And one thing we forget as humans is that we created those walls, and those are illusions. They help us to understand things, but we do forget that they're illusions. And going back to this attempt to look at things from the non-human perspective, there are certain questions that humanity struggles with. Um, and it's still today, in the world we're living in now, we have UFO disclosure, which is connected with remote viewing and consciousness and all the other things we're talking about. We we right now, our countries are trying to prepare the general population for disclosure of information that we might not be the only intelligent ones in the universe. And uh, what a what a slow process that is because of the way we think from a human perspective. The way we've thought for um, now in the Western world for now more than 2,000 years is that we were created. The on Earth, and we were very special. And we are the crowning achievement, and we are this solo thing. And now we're having to combat that training to say that there's something else out there, and it's a shock to many people. When if you look at it from a non-human perspective, if you look at it from the perspective of what we know about the universe. Now, I know that there are a lot of people that talk about how the universe is so massive and so huge. And these people still talk. Now, it takes 5 light years to get to our nearest star neighbor, our nearest solar neighbor. Now, I remember back in the 90s when a lot of people, a lot of scientists were saying, we probably won't find many planets outside of our solar system. And when we do, if we do, they'll probably be gas giants, no chance of life. And then fast forward just a few years, and then suddenly we were starting to find planets around other solar systems. And then we were starting to find plenty of Earth-like planets that were within habitable zones. We now have hundreds of planets that we've now identified to the point where now there are some scientists saying that it might be average to find planets in the habitable zones. Like 1 in every 10 solar systems might have it. So the statistics are dramatically changing over the course of our lifetime. So it's given me the perspective of we're not special. We might be average. People should consider that life might actually be just what naturally happens. If you are near a star, or what's very popular in the universe are binary star systems, if you are near a star, there's a high likelihood that planets will have formed. If planets have formed, and in our case, as our kind of biology, we want to see that in a habitable zone near its star, but life might exist outside of that, as we've learned with extremophiles here on Earth. So ultimately, where I'm going with this is that what makes us so special? We might very well discover that we are average in this galaxy and in this universe. We are the average, that when certain conditions are correct, life automatically is there. And that is a part of a process that happens everywhere because the stuff of the universe, it's not necessarily uniform, but it's uniform enough that the same stuff we have access to is seemingly everywhere. So why think that we might have any chance of being alone in a universe that is concocted of that?
This is the whole Fermi paradox, basically. That what you've just talked about there. That if the universe is so massive, where is everyone? Where is the aliens? Now, there are a number of answers to that. One is maybe we're looking in the wrong place. Maybe there is other people out there and they don't want to be found and they have looked at us and thought, fuck that, basically. Maybe it's a case of we're sending out radio waves to get to them and they don't even know what radio waves are. Why are we using our equipment to get to them when they are different kind of animals, as it were? As you said, maybe it's very rare to have these sorts of stars that allow for life forms to be there. There's a whole host of sort of potential arguments as to why there is or isn't other life forms. Or one of the most interesting ones actually is the development of your species. So either the species hasn't. So what? So first of all, why are we assuming that this other species or aliens basically have interstellar travel when we don't even have it? First of all, and if that's the case, the question is, well, where are they in their development? Are they not at interstellar travel yet, or, and this is a really interesting point, is maybe civilizations are designed to destroy themselves before they ever get there. I mean, look where we are. We're very close to self-destruction through war and greed and AI, which could have its own downfall. So there's a lot to unpick there, and I don't really want to go too far into the Fermi Paradox because that's the whole conversation in itself, I suppose. But one of the things that I do want to bring back what you said is about divide and conquer, about the different sort of categories that we put ourselves into. And again, Alan Watts talks about this. He says, imagine someone did come to Earth, again, the aliens that all other consciousness comes to Earth. To them, every single person would look the same. They wouldn't see white, they wouldn't see black, they wouldn't see Chinese, they wouldn't see Indian. They would just see humans. Imagine as a child, you just saw dogs. You didn't see Labradors, you didn't see Staffies, you didn't see Pit Bulls, you didn't see Huskies, you just saw that's a dog. He talks about when he moved, Alan Watts, when he moved to China and Japan, like the whole common joke is that everyone looks the same there. This is Alan Watts saying this, by the way, not me. And he
Yeah.
says, look, after me being there for a little while, I distinguished faces. I distinguished, Chinese or Japanese or Korean. And all it was is that our brain wants to distinguish things. And because we can't make enough distinctions yet, it's because we're not deep enough. Now, that's sort of slightly off topic from the divide and conquer side. But again, it's that distinction thing that you're talking about. It comes in many different forms, isn't it? So, coming back to remote viewing then.
hmm
What's your favourite story, or whether it's an urban myth or whatever? What's your favourite with regards to remote viewing?
My favorite story. My own, I guess. I've had so many experiences now that I don't even spend a lot of time thinking about the things I've read about. Um, I found the things that Ingo Swann wrote about. I found them very interesting, like his visiting Jupiter and other planets, particularly his remote viewing of the moon. I found that interesting, and talking about people, not myself. What attracted me to remote viewing and specifically to Ingo Swann was a fascination with how he remote viewed the moon and and sensed structures there and non-human intelligence is there. And he wrote about that in his book Penetration on human and extraterrestrial intelligence. So I highly recommend that book to people if they want to get kind of a deeper dive into some of this stuff. But I'll say my favorite personal experiences, they've been my personal experiences. Um, because you can read about stuff other people did, and then when you start doing things yourself, then it overwrites everything that came before. So if I were to try and think of, gosh, well, okay, would you like me to share
Of
one of my
course, of course,
experiences?
of course.
This is not entire all remote viewing because it also involved an out-of-body experience, and it was amazing. It was just one of many things that happened. Um, So shortly after I started tasking other people to do remote viewing targets for me, I was giving these out for more than a year at this point. There was a um, a wonderful woman in Austria. I want to make sure I'm getting the country right. So yes, I'm pretty sure she, at least at this time, was living in Austria. And this was an international remote viewing group that I had set up. So I gave her a target, and she was a very skilled remote viewer. She's still doing it today and posting a lot of her work. And so she remote viewed a target for me, gave me a lot of great information. It was fantastic. A number of people gave me great information. And before I continue with the story, I'll say, um, after you do mental work of this sort, sometimes a lot of people like to clear their mind of it and disconnect themselves from the target. She, it seems, did not disconnect herself from this target. And so I had only, as I was collecting data from everybody who had done this project with me, I just kind of close out the target. Everybody goes their way. I give a new target, and then people come in and participate with the new one. She had not closed her mental channels. And when you're remote viewing, you create these mental channels that will connect you with the target, perhaps the person that is creating the target. You draw that information in subconsciously from everywhere. So, um, this is I'm going to make an interesting jump to an event that happened that blew my mind. So, about a month after I gave this particular target, where I had met her for the first time as a participant, I at the time was meditating every single night. I would be in my living room, lights are off. This is how I ended every night. I'm meditating, and then suddenly, now I had my eyes closed. The image of her appeared right in front of me. And I was like, "Whoa, are you actually here right now?" Because I'm like my eyes are closed, so I see her kind of with my imagination, I'll say. So suddenly, just very vividly, I'm imagining her right in front of me, about maybe 4 feet in front of where I'm sat meditating. And I said, "Are you here right now?" And she says, "Yes, I am." I said, "Okay, you're having like an out-of-body experience or something. I would like for you to prove to me that you're actually here in my living room, on whatever level you're projecting your consciousness. Stop whatever you're doing and send me a text message, because that's the only way we were communicating at the time." And so she said, I can't do that right now because I'm in a very deep sleep. And and then it hit me. Yes, in America it's 10 p.m. So in Austria at that time it's 4 a.m. So she was out cold and having this out of body experience while she was sleeping. So I said, "Okay, then when you wake up, I want you to remember this moment and I want you to send me a message tomorrow. So please do that." And so, sure enough, the next day came. She sent me a message, and we have been close friends ever since. We discussed and made a video recording of our interaction. The very next day, I said, "Okay, we've got to capture this while it's fresh. This just happened. Let's get on a Zoom call and record step by step everything that both of us experienced." So, for me, there is a fascination with the human ability um, to leave the body and travel and actually uh, be detectable by someone on the other end. And so I have continued experiments with that, like that, with other people as well. And my mind is blown every time you can set up a meeting either in a dream or kind of randomly. And if it's random, then be able to verify that it happened right afterwards. So
That's
that's the
crazy. That's
first experience
crazy.
that comes to me.
That's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
They were in a dream, or she was in a dream, visiting you, and then you conversed afterwards.
hmm And what was
Crazy.
also interesting is that we're separated by thousands of miles. She has no idea where I live.
But distance doesn't matter, as
So
you said at the start.
exactly. So how did she know where I lived? How did she find herself into my home? And that I found fascinating. And I have a better understanding of how some of that works now. If we are all one, then essentially we the illusion of our separateness can go away. And the way remote viewing works is that we can find our way around very easily, not geographically. We can teleport places.
It's like
Uh,
the
loaded.
it's like the computers, isn't it? You know, if you've got like 100 word or 100 digit password, it used to find the first one, then find it knows the first one, then it finds one and two, then it finds one, two, three. Now it just does them all at the same time, everything,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
it could be very much like that. That our conscience doesn't need to check every house. It just does it on a quantum, checks everything all together, on the system, on the network, on the computer. Control F, find, Fabian, and it just
Hmm.
goes straight there. So, it's really interesting. And obviously,
What
you now. Sorry, go on.
what we're actually doing is broadcasting and receiving. We are transmitting information uh, all the time, all around us, all around the planet, and possibly into outer space as well. So the fact that I'm here right now, I am broadcasting, just like our computer conversation here. There is information about my space time coordinates constantly being broadcast by the fact that I'm sitting here right now. And that is what I personally believe is what she keyed in on. And people can do that. During remote viewing, you are traveling. It's kind of like a radio station as well. You want to listen to a certain radio station, tune to that particular station, and there goes what you were looking for.
Absolutely, and there's very much that metaphor does ring true, doesn't it, for a lot of things. But if anyone wants to sort of learn how to do this, I know that you're now running your own sort of courses, and obviously doing a video as well, documentary. Could you just talk about a little bit about that for us?
Sure. Now, this is funny. I have always been up. I've been a filmmaker for a few decades. Now, if you look into me, you'll find that I've done a lot of science fiction, a lot of low budget horror, comedy stuff. Uh, so my life is not all remote viewing all the time. I'm also in a metal band, so I get into a lot of stuff. And one of these things was filmmaking and developing an interest in documentary work on my personal interests. I loved H.P. Lovecraft, so I made a movie about Lovecraftian lore. And then once I got through that, I thought, I have so many interests, but one of the core things with me as a young person, I always had these out-of-body experiences. And that's something I did not get to fully explore. What if I just devoted projects to that? And then, of course, I'd also learned about Ingo Swann much later as an adult. And I thought, it's time for me to combine these parts of my life. And I want to make a movie that dives into the truth behind my childhood experiences, my out-of-body experiences, and what I'm learning scientifically, that the studies that went into who Ingo was and who all of us ultimately are. And so I thought, let me do this documentary. I went to a remote viewing conference a few years ago, and I met Ingo Swann's niece, Ellie Flippen. And in fact, she's the one that gave me the pictures that you see behind me. These are both original paintings of Ingo's. And she and I started talking. I said I've always wanted to make a movie about this kind of material, and I would specifically love to make something about Ingo. And so we started talking. It turned out we lived in the same town. We lived within 20 minutes of each other. Had no idea. So we met for coffee. We've been talking uh, at least on a weekly basis ever since. She I told her I wanted to have her understanding of who Ingo was, and she loaded all of this information onto me. She gave me a lot of materials to work with for in terms of like photographs, his military service record, all kinds of things for me to scan and then start utilizing in this documentary. And so yeah, that was a big, just a huge recent development for me to pull me into this filmmaking, this whole process here. And now I'm beginning to wonder if I've lost sight of your original question. So sorry if
Films and courses. Obviously, you're doing the courses now as well. So
yes.
it was talking about sort of how you're or what you're actively doing in this space, if that makes sense, and
Okay.
making a mark essentially.
Gotcha. So a lot of this, a lot of my original goal was to make the movie. And then I got pulled into making a lot of friends. After I'd done my research, I started making a lot of friends in the community. And now movies are a very long, drawn out process. And so while in the process of making this film, suddenly somebody from a new app called Witch Space was just looking for people that had skill in some kind of a an unusual mental practice, be it some kind of a consciousness, a meditation, some form of witchcraft, or some sort of knowledge about ancient religions or mythology, any of that stuff. She was looking for guest speakers to come on and make presentations on the Witch Space app. And so I said, okay, well, she knew me through remote viewing. So I said, well, I can give a talk on the history and science behind remote viewing. And I can also do a training course just to kind of introduce people to the protocol, one of the protocols of remote viewing. So she said, all right, come on. And so I did that talk and it went over pretty well. So I've been asked to come back and now it's becoming a more regular class. So I've got a little syllabus forming here.
So where can people reach you and sort of find your projects, etc.? Obviously, we'll put all of the stuff that you've mentioned in the sort of show notes or description, if you know whichever word you prefer there, so people can click them and stuff. But
A Where a lot of my remote viewing targets are. Most of that is on Facebook now, on the Facebook page. I think it's facebook.com/ project FARV. And that's an acronym for future applications for remote viewing. So you can go there, see a bunch of the projects that I did publicly. There are a lot of videos on there where I would share targets with the remote viewers. A lot of them, we could catch their reactions and just kind of see the remote viewing work that went into it so you can see what projects are like, the kind of data people can expect to get. So that's that one. That's also where I've made announcements about the documentary. So you can see little teasers, little commercials, the things that I've put out with interview footage of Ingo Swann, Hal Puthoff, Russell Targ, a lot of the scientists that worked with Ingo, as well as some of the military personnel that he trained. So that's all on Facebook. Some of that stuff is getting onto my LinkedIn page, and I'm on LinkedIn. I'm just Fabian Rush. I might be Fabian.Rush or something like that, but I look like this, so you'll know when you find me on LinkedIn. And I'm also on Instagram, but not so much for remote viewing things. A lot of Instagram stuff is more geared toward my band and various personal projects like that. Um, so Which Space, and I think that's just whichspace.app, is something that is becoming available. I'll be doing all of my training basically through there. I'm not, I don't see myself as wanting to pursue training as a day job forever. So I'm mostly doing it for applications or anybody who's kind of asking me to come in and do a talk. And once the lessons have been put out there and people are able to just kind of YouTube or Google these things, I intend to just focus on my own little meditative practices and have more experiences.
love it. Yeah, we'll put all those in the show notes, as I said, and yeah, keep doing what you're doing. I think it's a really interesting space, and as I said, definitely it's something that's in the ether currently. It's
Yeah.
definitely there's more discussion going on about it, and people are trying to understand it a bit more, and definitely more uptake from what I can see in terms of conversations about it. Definitely.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been a great conversation. Actually, we veered off to a really interesting side of things, philosophically, and yeah, it's been a great chat.
Well, I guess we're wrapping up here. I'll say that I'm happy that right now the world is kind of opening their minds to a lot of these these concepts. And it is a philosophical conversation. We have to ask ourselves why we've believed and thought in the way we have for the last long period of time. And a lot of people are starting to realize maybe there is something more to consciousness specifically that science has veered away from a lot in previous years.
That's so true. And as we said, maybe it's a case of new information, and actually maybe the trajectory then changes, and
Mhm.
we view things in a different direction. In the past, witches were drowned and burned.
We are recovering from the dark ages,
So,
and you're not really gonna talk much about this kind of stuff in a world that'll burn you. So that's a big part of it.
but the big question I have is, and we'll just finish with this as a rhetorical, I suppose. What are some of the things that we're doing today then that we'll think in 100 years, or they will look back and think, is that how they used to think? Is that how they used to live? Think about that.
Let's remote view that.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely. But
Yeah.
thanks again, Fabian.
It's been a pleasure talking with you. Thank you for having me.